Thanks, Armando. Thank you, Armando. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Good to see you guys. And I have a little weird story to share. The reason I just arrived, we're talking about the deep state. The deep state seems to have sent an agent to my house last night. They didn't want this presentation made. And I'm not even kidding, only half kidding. Maybe the devil, I don't know. But some weirdo showed up at my house. My wife was home with the kids all alone. The guy was banging on the door, banging on the windows. She's getting out the gun, calling the police. So long story short, I had to rush home from Orlando, and I'm operating on about an hour worth of sleep. But everything worked out all right. So there we go. We're going to talk about the deep state today. A lot of us have heard of this term in relation to Trump and what's been going on with all the leaks and all the rest of it. So I want to kind of define the deep state and show you guys what we can do to stop it. And, first of all, what it is, and second of all, what we can do to stop it and preserve our freedom. So, when we think of deep states, we normally think of countries like Egypt and Pakistan and the Soviet Union, where there's this kind of power behind the throne, right? But we don't normally think of America, or at least we didn't, most of us, until pretty recently. When Trump got elected, we had some very interesting things happen. We had this whole machinery, the media, the bureaucrats, the intelligence community, so-called, and all the rest of it, kind of in this big chorus of anti-Trump hysteria. And people said, wait a minute, that sounds coordinated, right? That's just a conspiracy theory. Well, a lot of people have looked at this and said, something weird is going on here. And according to an ABC News poll, fake news, Washington Compost participated, so take it for what it's worth. But about half of Americans now believe that there is a such thing as a deep state, and they define it as an apparatus of bureaucracy, military, and intelligence that kind of operates behind the scenes beyond the control of voters and elected officials. So they even defined it, right? So obviously the deep state is international. America is not unique. We're not the only ones with a deep state. And in fact, the deep state here in America is connected to a broader thing that I'll call a deep state that operates worldwide. And in fact, important tentacles of it are here in the United States, but it's not the end-all and be-all, even though I will be focusing on the United States. So again, we know most people now believe in the deep state. We have most Democrats, most Republicans, most independents, and young people are even more likely to believe in the deep state than older people. So that's a good sign that people realize at least everything is not as it seems. We're not being told the whole truth. So that's really encouraging. Here's Politico saying the deep state is real. So they're kind of admitting it now, although they want to misdirect us. Edward Snowden, the whistleblower, think whatever you will about him. He's hiding out in Russia, which is kind of weird. But he said the deep state is real, and he worked in the deep state for a very long time. You have Dennis Kucinich, a Democrat, right? And if there is a such thing as a good Democrat, we might call Dennis Kucinich a good Democrat. He's a good guy. I think most of us would disagree with him on a lot of policy, but at least he's honest. At least he's not controlled by the deep state, so-called. And he talked about how the deep state was going after Trump. So this was very honest from a Democrat. We have the FBI. Just the day before I put this presentation together, an FBI report was leaked talking about a deep state, saying, hey, there is this group of bureaucrats and officials who don't like Trump and who are trying to sabotage him. So, as we'll see, it goes way beyond Trump, right? The reason they just hate Trump and they've kind of dropped the mask during the Trump administration is because they don't think they can trust Trump. And maybe they're right. I don't know. We'll see. So deep state, really, we never even heard this term as it relates to America until 2014. We had a congressional staffer, Mike Lofgren, who worked for a Republican. He had a top secret security clearance, but he wasn't a fan of the Tea Party. He called them tea jihadists or something like that. So he's not a conservative Republican. But he talked about this deep state that operates behind the scenes. And he gave us some vague contours of it. He talked about how Wall Street is crucial to this operation, how the intelligence agencies, the security agencies are all involved. And they do have an agenda. Right, so he kind of scratched the surface on this. So it's not my term. It's not even a new term. It's been around for a few years. But during the Trump administration is when this really came out. There's Mike Lofgren. Must be a good Swede or have Swedish ancestors somewhere with that last name. But he wrote a book about this. Then we have the Higgins memo. I'm sure some of you guys heard of Rich Higgins, who was working in the National Security Council. He wrote actually a really good memo, and apparently Trump was a fan of it, talking about how globalists and Islamists and the media and all these others who wanted to destroy the United States had joined forces to destroy Trump. And he was fired for that by a guy that we'll see later, I think is very clearly an agent of what we'll call the deep state, or even the deep state behind the deep state. So there's Higgins. He got fired. There's the bureaucratic deep state. So we're going to go through each of these different factions of the deep state, right? And there's more to it, but I'm limited on time. So we'll talk about the bureaucracies. We'll talk about the so-called intelligence community. We'll talk about the semi-secret organizations, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral, Bilderberg, and then we'll talk a little bit about the secret societies and the money men involved in all this. So we won't dwell too long on any of them, but the bureaucratic deep state, so we have almost 3 million bureaucrats in America working for the federal government, not including our soldiers and not including the 20 million or so who work at the state and local level. So we have a lot of bureaucrats in America. I mean, imagine what 3 million people looks like. It's humongous. And the overwhelming majority, in fact, almost all of them, hate Trump, which is interesting. I have a little, here we go. So this graph here actually came from The Hill, more fake news generally, but this was a good investigation they did. They looked at all the contributions that the bureaucrats had given to the political candidates in 2016. The blue is Hillary Clinton, the red is Donald Trump. So some of these bureaucracies, you had 99.8, 99.7% of the donations were going to Hillary Clinton, and 0.2 were going to Trump. The best one, I think, was the Department of Defense, and that was about 90% for Hillary. We normally think of the Pentagon as kind of conservative. Well, they like Hillary too. Surprise. The Justice Department, the State Department, the Education Department, 99.7% for Hillary. These are the people dictating what your kids learn in the classroom, and they love Hillary. And the DOJ too, 97% or something. We wonder why they didn't find her guilty. Right? So we know they like Clinton, and they don't like us, and they don't like Trump. I am talking really fast, I realize that, and I know some of you guys are thinking, man, he needs to slow down. The problem is if I do that, we won't get to the end of the presentation. So I'll break all the rules of public speaking, and you guys will just have to bear with me. I think the presentation will be on YouTube later. So if I went too fast and you want to go back and say, what was he talking about? Or if you want to whip out your smartphone and say, that can't be true, fact check me while I talk, and you'll see that I didn't include anything in here that's not indisputably true. So Joe Biden, he says, all the bureaucrats, you guys need to stay put because eventually sanity will return, right? Trump will be gone and we'll go back to normal. Clinton said the same thing. The bureaucrats are calling all the time, and we know that a lot of Obama's people burrowed their way into the bureaucracy, right? We had 78 of his political appointees became civil servants right at the end of his tenure. And the reason for this is because then they can't be fired, right? If they're political appointees, they're going to be removed. If they're not, it's impossible to get rid of them almost. I mean, they could be involved in criminal activity, and you can't get rid of them thanks to these civil service laws that we have. So the deep state monster, I just want to give you guys a little bit of an overview. Nobody actually knows the real number, right? It's pretty crazy. A member of Congress asked the Congressional Research Service, hey, why don't you go figure out for us how many regulations have criminal penalties attached? And they found out that we actually can't calculate that number. We don't have the resources or the ability to find out how many federal regulations have criminal penalties attached. You could go to jail for a lot of these, and you've probably never heard of more than one or two of them. And there's a really good book. It's actually written by a liberal. 3 felonies a day, Harvey Silvergate. He did some analysis and he figured out that the average American probably commits 3 felonies a day without even knowing it. So, to just give you some examples, if you walk your dog within 200 feet of a federal property with a leash that's more than 6 feet long, you've broken federal criminal regulations. If you write a check for less than $1, right, say you run through a toll booth or whatever, you got to pay 50 cents, that's a federal crime. So you commit a lot of these every day. If you have a piece of property, you might have a pond on there. Oh, you fertilized your plant without getting an EPA permit. Okay, it's a big problem, right? You could end up in jail. Now, for most of us, we're not going to end up in jail for breaking these, right? But if you happen to make the deep state really mad, like if your name is Donald Trump and you have a special prosecutor called Mueller trolling through all your emails and everything, they might find one of these 500,000 criminal regulations that you've broken and put you in jail. Or maybe if your name is Mike Flynn, or on and on the list goes, right? If you're Hillary Clinton, oh, there's nothing to see here. But if you're Trump or somebody else, it could be different, right? So now we'll talk about the intelligence community, because the bureaucracy really is, when the media talks about the deep state, a lot of times they're talking about the bureaucracy, and that is one component of it. There really is a lot of bureaucrats who hate Trump, who hate the Constitution, who hate us, right, because we voted for Trump. And they want to stop him. They want to stop the agenda. They don't want to make America great again. They don't believe in America first. They believe in globalism and socialism, and we'll see a little bit of that in just a moment. But then the intelligence community, I call them kind of the operational arm of the deep state, right? They do the dirty work that, a guy from the CFR couldn't just walk out of his building and assassinate someone or rob a bank or, overthrow a foreign government. They have to use these shadowy, clandestine operations. And I'll start with the caveat that not all these guys are bad, right? I know some of them. They're not all bad. Some of them are good patriots. But a lot of them are really, really bad, and we'll see Couple of examples. So we know they're against Trump, right? I mean, we had a record number of leaks. We had one national security leak per day for the first 125 days of the Trump administration. This was unprecedented. All these leaks were designed to destroy the president and sabotage his agenda. We found out that they were spying on the Trump team, right? We found out now they were spying on Mike Flynn. They brag about it, right? They got him to plead guilty to lying to the FBI. The reason they knew he was lying to the FBI, supposedly, is because they had the transcripts of his calls. So they were spying on the incoming president and his team for things that, you know, are totally innocuous. They never accused him of collaborating with Russia. They just accused him of not telling the truth about what was in the phone call. Had they know what was in the phone call? They were spying on him, right? So they spy on our president. They spy on everybody they want. They spy on members of Congress, as we'll see. And these guys are really powerful, right? Trump made them mad, and this guy from the NSA, he went out on Twitter and he said, oh, this is war, right? This is going nuclear. Trump is going to die in jail, is what one of his little buddies, a high-ranking official in the intelligence community, told him. So who are these people that can threaten the democratically elected president of the United States? That's some serious power, right? Supposedly Trump is their boss, and here they are conspiring to throw him in jail and have him die there. Well, here's Chuck Schumer, everybody's favorite Democrat. And he's the Senate Minority Leader, and he gave us some hint as to how powerful they are. He went on Rachel Maddow, you know, the left-wing activist on MSNBC. He said, let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, and they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. So the Senate Minority Leader knows that if you mess with these bureaucrats in the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Isn't that cute? So we think we run things and we vote for things, and then here we see the facts coming out that they do whatever they want, basically. We have 16 intelligence bureaucracies. Each branch of the armed services has one. The Washington Post, before it was bought by Bilderberger Jeff Bezos, they did a really good analysis, actually, of the intelligence community. They said they have 1,250 government agencies. More than 2,000 companies involved in this at more than 10,000 locations. And they have more than 1 million people with top secret security clearances. You know, I'm all for keeping America safe, but I'm pretty sure we don't need this to keep America safe. Silicon Valley, of course, has been conscripted in this, right? So they spy on everybody for the NSA and, you know, really help facilitate that. And they even start wars, according to Lofgren, this congressional staffer, top secret security clearance, who wrote this book, The Deep State. He said they just start wars willy-nilly, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Who cares how many people die? Who cares how many Christians are exterminated? We'll just start more wars. It'll always be based on lies, but that's what they do, according to him and Dennis Kucinich and a whole bunch of others. We know that the deep state wanted an ISIS. We know because we have smoking gun documents from the deep state intelligence bureaucracies. Judicial Watch sued the Defense Department and got a hold of this incredible document from 2012 in August from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I encourage you, you know, whip out your smartphone and read this thing yourself. This is incredible. So they admit in there that the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, which is Al-Qaeda in Iraq, is the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. So they tell us here that this insurgency in Syria is actually led by Al-Qaeda, which is a designated terrorist organization. And you know, if you go back far enough in history, you'll find that that has roots in the intelligence community too. Go to Afghanistan and see how they were funding the Mujahideen, right? So all this goes back to that. But then they say that the West, by which they include the U.S. government, France, the U.K., etc., the Gulf countries, the Islamist dictatorships, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, these over in the Arab Peninsula, and then Turkey, support the opposition. So they tell us here they're supporting an opposition that they know for a fact, according to the document, is led by Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. And then they say that, and I'll just read it word for word because I don't want to put words in their mouth. They say there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. So Salafism is, you know, this hardcore Islam of the ISIS and Saudi Arabia, you know, Wahhabism, whatever. And they say that this is exactly what the supporting powers want. And we know from a couple lines earlier that the supporting powers includes us. So a principality is, you know, a small governing entity governed by a prince or whatever, or a caliph, as the case may be. Salafism is hardcore Islam. Eastern Syria is where ISIS is based. So they wanted an ISIS. We call this principality the Islamic State today. And that's why when Trump said Hillary and Obama are co-founders of ISIS, you know, the media said, oh, look at Trump, how silly he is. He was being serious, and he was right. Right? They were sending weapons to these people. They were encouraging this revolution. They were giving it diplomatic support. And you know, all along, we're being told that we need this intelligence bureaucracy to keep us safe from the mean, bad Muslims who are going to come here and kill us and take our freedom, right? And here we have smoking gun evidence that they were in bed with these same people they're supposedly keeping us safe from, right? So something is really wrong here. And this is, the deep state in a nutshell, really, at least as far as the intelligence agencies go. Here's Trump talking about how Obama and Hillary founded ISIS. And, again, he was right. And he said it over and over again. I'm not kidding. They are the co-founders of ISIS. Stop laughing. It's true. And he was right. He was right. He even tweeted out a few articles showing that this was true. So we know also that the FBI does lots of fake terrorism, right? There's been multiple analyses. They've even appeared in the New York Slimes, the fake news, that most of the terror attacks or terror plots since 9/11 have actually been orchestrated almost from start to finish by the FBI. They'll find, some mentally challenged dupe and they'll say, oh yeah, hate America, here, have some bombs. Now go push this button, right? And the guy will go push the button and they'll swarm in and they'll put out a press release about how great they are for protecting us all from terrorism. And they do false flag operations too. We have smoking gun documents, right? Under the guise of keeping us safe from communism, they had Operation Mongoose and Operation Northwoods. You can read the documents yourself. They were planning to blow things up in my hometown, Miami, shoot down airliners and blame it on a foreign government to start a war. So, not very nice. Here's some, some of the quotes from it. You can look it up yourself. And, all this under the guise of anti-communism, and yet we know for a fact that they put Fidel Castro in power. Right? The ambassador to Havana at that time, Earl Smith, said, hey, what are you guys doing? This guy's a communist. And the New York Times said, oh, no, he's a freedom fighter. He's like George Washington for Cuba. And the CFR said, oh, yeah, liberator, right? No communist here. And the State Department was shoving weapons at the Castros and stabbing Batista in the back so they could put this freedom fighter in power. And, now we know what happens. And they pointed nuclear missiles at us and stole everybody's businesses and put people up against the wall and shot them. They were supposed to keep us safe from communism, right? That's what they told us. Well, here's John Brennan. This was Obama's director of the CIA. He admitted to the Congressional Black Caucus that he voted for the Communist Party candidate in 1976, Gus Hall, a Soviet puppet. And he also admitted that he told the CIA this 4 years later, 4 years after he voted for the communists. He told the CIA that he voted for the communists. And they gave him a top secret security clearance, and they promoted him up through the ranks until he eventually became the CIA director. So, this was, 1980. We were supposed to be fighting communists, right? They were supposed to be keeping us safe from communists. And here we know they were hiring people who voted for communists. So what is going on here? This goes back to the very beginning. If you go back to the OSS, it was packed with communists. The FBI went to the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA. They said, hey, this place is filled with communists. What are you doing? We know these people are members of the Communist Party. They said, oh, yeah, we know. And they still brag about this, right? I have a whole bunch of names of these people, and we had defectors. The Venona documents revealed hundreds of these people in the U.S. government. I guess McCarthy was right. And then this was like in 2008, some columnist had written in the Washington Compost that the OSS was infiltrated by communists. And the president of the OSS Society, these were the OSS veterans, he wrote a letter to the editor, you can find this on the Washington Post website today, said, we weren't infiltrated by communists, we hired them. They were supposed to be keeping us safe from communism. Why would you hire communists if you're keeping us safe from communism? So, they do all kinds of crimes. I could spend a really long time talking about the intelligence bureaucracies, but I won't because we don't have it. But, they engage in torture. We have the pictures. We have the smoking gun proof. They engage in mass murder, and they brag about it, right? I think I even have a video of them bragging about it. They engage in gun running, as we saw in Operation Fast and Furious, right? Sending thousands of American weapons to Mexican drug cartels, and then saying, oh, look, American guns are so bad. It's because of your Second Amendment that there's all this violence in Mexico. And then, oops, they got caught sending the weapons down there, right? And they said, oh, we're conducting an investigation, right? And then we found out the guy they were investigating was already on the FBI payroll. So something very fishy is going on here. They talk so much about terrorists, and I just want to pause for a minute. There's 72 categories that the U.S. government has defined in the last 10 years or so of people who should be considered or should be looked at as suspicious terrorists, potential terrorists, right-wing extremists. And it includes probably every person sitting in this room. Do you oppose abortion? That's you. Do you oppose a New World Order? That's you. Do you want secure borders? They're talking about you. Do you like Ron Paul or Chuck Baldwin? They're looking at you. And they told us this, right? During the Obama administration, they were pumping out these documents to our local police as fast as they could, saying that returning veterans should be considered suspicious. People who were worried about the Federal Reserve or talk about the Constitution too much, liberty lovers. So all this machinery that they're building up to keep us safe from terrorists, we already know that they're helping out the actual terrorists. And we also know from their own documents that they consider us to be the terrorists. Here's a document that they were teaching to the Department of Defense to some of our troops. And I got this directly out of their slideshow. This is their slide. It's a list of religious extremists. And of course, you have Al-Qaeda, you have Hamas, you have the Ku Klux Klan, and then you also have evangelical Christians, Catholics, and Orthodox Jews. I mean, why wouldn't they belong on that list, right? So here's some of the stuff that they do in our name and with our money, right? And this is what's going to go in the history books when they totally discredit America. They're going to say, look, they tried that freedom thing, they tried that Christian nation thing, and look what happened. They're a bunch of savage barbarians, right? So here's some of the methods we know they've been using to torture people. I mean, it's just stuff that's so horrifying you can't imagine. Here's their secret prisons, right? They have secret prisons all over the world. They literally, like in the movies, they kidnap people off the street, put a bag on their head, shove them into a van, send them to a secret prison in Egypt to be tortured, and then let them go. Actually, 23 CIA agents were convicted in an Italian court for grabbing a guy off the street, putting a bag on his head, shoving him in a van, and sending him to Egypt for torture. He came out permanently disabled. They were doing genital torture, electrical shock torture, just incredible stuff. So we know, they've been murdering people for a long time. In 1975, we found out they had an ice gun. They testified before Congress that they could shoot an ice dart into you that had some kind of poison, and you would die from a heart attack. And nobody would ever know because the ice dart would melt and that would be the end. So this was in 1975. Now they don't even really bother to make it secret anymore. Now if they don't like you, they'll just fly a drone over you and drop a bomb and they'll say he was probably a militant of some kind. Oh, he was a child. Well, that's just collateral damage. Sorry about that. But they admit that they've murdered thousands of people doing that. And murder is the only proper term. These people have not been convicted of a crime. Most of them have never even been charged with a crime. In America, we have presumption of innocence. We have due process of law. None of these people have been convicted by a jury. There's no declaration of war authorizing wars all over the world. So this is mass murder. Here's two of the victims of these drone strikes. So they're actually both born in America. Their father allegedly produced some YouTube propaganda videos that the government didn't like. They didn't even charge him with a crime. They didn't take him to jail. They didn't put him through a court proceeding. But they killed him and they killed his kids. And these were both born in America. One was 8, one was, I think, 15 or 16. And so, again, mass murder is the correct term. This guy, and we'll see him again in a minute when we look at the Bilderbergs and the Trilateral Commission and the CFR because he's deeply intertwined with these. But I have a video of him, Michael Hayden. He was the head of the CIA and the head of, here we go. Let's see if we can watch.
This is all done under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court is the secret court that weighs, as I said, in secret, the legal justification for putting together a search of metadata linked to a person or persons, and then gives it an okay or a not okay, and it is on a time limit. General Hayden, you can find out all these things David just said about me, about David, about anyone in this audience. That is a function of operational capability. I'd like you to talk about whether you're comfortable with that operational capability. If so, why? And how often is it used in the ways that David described?
Yeah, first of all, David's description of what you can do with metadata, and quoting a mutual friend, Stuart Baker, is absolutely correct. Okay, we kill people based on metadata.
We kill people based on metadata, right? So, that might not be us today, but give it 10 years, give it 20 years. These guys are now openly killing people without charging them with a crime, without putting them through court, without anything except their metadata, apparently, right? Your metadata is now enough to have a drone strike launched at your head. And remember, during the Obama administration, they actually went to the courts. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, the criminal who sent all the guns to Mexico, they went to court and said, we have the right to kill anybody, including an American citizen, if the president says he's a danger to national security. So how long until we're declared a danger to national security? It might not be tomorrow. It might not even be next week. But at some point, Trump's not going to be the president anymore. At some time, these maniacs will get their people back in, and it's not going to look pretty. So we know they're spying on everything, right? This was the real whistleblower from the NSA, William Binney. He resigned in 2001. He said they're spying on everyone. They're gathering everything. They're getting all your phone calls, 80% of your emails. They're storing it all in these mega, server farms out in Utah and who knows where else. So they're not listening to every phone call of yours, but they have it recorded for future use. And if you make them really mad, and now with the emergence of artificial intelligence, how long until they can just get all that put into a quick document? They say, oh, well, we need to target Mr. X. Quick, find out what's in his NSA file, have the AI look through there, put together a report. We have 500,000 federal regulations with criminal penalties attached. It's not going to be hard to put you in jail or justify a drone strike on you. Here's one of the facilities they built in Utah. It can hold a yottabyte of information. That's the equivalent of 500 quintillion pages of text to give you some semblance of how much data they're gathering. And this was in '75. Frank Church, a senator, they did an investigation into the intelligence agencies, said, and this was, 35, 45 years ago, that the NSA had the capability to turn America into a complete and total dictatorship where nobody could resist. And this was a long time ago, before you had a spying device in your pocket, right? So imagine how far they've progressed since then. And even Congress is not safe from these people, right? And I think nobody here is going to say Senator Feinstein is their favorite senator, but her committee was investigating the CIA and their torture, and she found out that the CIA had been spying on her committee. They'd been going into their computers and deleting documents as part of the investigation to cover their tracks. If they can do this to sitting Senate committees, what can they do to us, right? What can they put in your computer or delete from your computer? It's very, very strange stuff. We talked about Operation Fast and Furious. We know they've been caught drug dealing so many times. I wish we had more time. I'd show you guys a video of the head of the DEA, Mr. Bonner, talking on CBS about how he caught the CIA shipping 1 metric ton of cocaine into the United States in collaboration with the Venezuelan government. And obviously that's not legal, right? There's no provision in the law that says you can drug deal if you're the CIA, right? And one enterprising journalist tried to expose all this, Gary Webb, and they just said on TV, right, he killed himself with 2 bullets to his head, right? It's unbelievable. But so I think the message here is, they want everybody with a brain to say, oh, so that's what happens if you go too deep into this, right? Because, nobody's going to believe that someone killed himself with 2 bullets to the brain. That's absurd. We know they overthrow governments all the time, right? All over the place. These are the ones we know of. These are the ones that Foreign Policy counted. Foreign Policy is owned by the Washington Compost. We know that the CIA played a key role in bringing the EU about. Right? We have the declassified documents now. They were funding AstroTurf movements in Europe to demand European federalism. and on it goes. Right? Here's the European Union, by the way. On the left is an artist's rendition of the Tower of Babel. On the right is right there with the stars is a propaganda poster actually created by the European Union. And then on the far right, you have an actual picture of the European Parliament. And the resemblance is not coincidental. In fact, they did that on purpose. And if you know anything about the Tower of Babel, that should start some serious questions going in your mind. So MK Ultra, we know that under the guise of keeping us safe, they were studying mind control. We have some of the documents. They shredded most of them, but we know they were giving mental patients and children LSD. We know they were torturing people to try to shatter their consciousness and program people to do things. This stuff all sounds like science fiction, but we have smoking gun documents proving it. You can find them on the internet. The CIA does not deny it. And again, they shredded most of the documents, so it's probably worse than what we know. We know that the CIA has had propaganda operations. Operation Mockingbird. They had at least 400 U.S. journalists that we know of, including owners of Time Magazine, journalists for the Washington Compost, for the New York Times. William Buckley, the guy who did National Review, right? He was one of the CIA's Mockingbird guys. He worked for the CIA. He was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was also a member of the Skull and Bones Secret Society that we'll talk about in a minute. And, so he's supposed to be Mr. Conservative, right? He's supposed to be the founder of the conservative movement with the alleged authority to excommunicate conservatives who he didn't like. Well, he was, as much a part of the deep state as anyone can be. Here's some other of the journalists, right? The founder of Time Magazine and Life Magazine, Henry Luce, was identified as one of these Operation Mockingbird assets. So lots and lots of them, right? We think we could trust the news. Of course we can't. Now we know. So let's talk about deep state money real quick. Obviously, I'm not the first one to point some of these things out. People who agree with these things have pointed these things out. There might even be a copy in the back. I don't know if Jan has one, but the John Birch Society sells a book called Tragedy and Hope. This was published in 1966 by a guy called Carroll Quigley. Actually, you can listen to Bill Clinton. He says, Carroll Quigley was my mentor. He was a history professor at Georgetown. And this book is incredibly revealing. It's thousands of pages. It's a little bit boring, but there's incredible revelations in there. He says he agrees with the goals of what he calls this Anglophile international network. He says he agrees with their goals. The only thing he disagrees with is the secrecy. He says he's been close to them for many years. He likes what they're doing, with a few exceptions, and he put his findings into the book. So here's a couple of quotes, and I encourage you to look up this guy in more detail because he knew what he was talking about. So he said that the powers of financial capitalism, by which he means, what I'm talking about is the deep state, had this plan to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. They said the system was going to be controlled in a feudalist fashion, right? Does everyone remember feudalism from middle school history class, right? Wasn't fun. By the central banks of the world acting in concert through secret meetings. So the apex of the system was going to be the Bank for International Settlements, which my friend Frank de Varona in the back has got a book. He's got that on his cover, right? The BIS. This is an important institution, and most people never even heard of it. Mike Lofgren, I keep coming back to him because he was the first one to say, hey, we have a deep state in America. He says Wall Street is a critical component of this deep state, and he's right. And man, I'm almost running out of time. Armando, I'm supposed to finish at 20 past, is that right? So I have like 17 minutes left? 23, okay, perfect. So the deep state has a lot of too big to jail, too big to fail banks in its orbits, right? And Attorney General Eric Holder told us they were too big to jail. Would that we were too big to jail, right? That would be nice, but we're not. So the Rothschild banking dynasty, for those of you who haven't heard of them, they're really one of the big money men behind this whole deep state operation. We talk about George Soros a lot. You know who got George Soros his start? It was the Rothschild dynasty. So Soros was their protege. So you think Soros is the bad guy. Well, there's another layer behind Soros, right? And there's even another layer behind the Rothschilds. We'll talk about it a little bit at the end. And they brag, right, that they're at the center of world finance and that they're closer to the action than anybody can be. And they're not lying. Here's Niall Ferguson. He's very globalist-minded, establishment, deep state type apologist. And he says in his book about the Rothschilds decided the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial weight behind Britain. So hundreds of years ago, this dynasty was so powerful, it could decide the outcome of a war between two of the most powerful governments then in existence on the planet. Since then, their power, I think, has grown even greater. So you can imagine these people are pretty powerful, right? You don't hear about them in the fake news, but they're very powerful. Here's one of them, Baron Erich de Rothschild. I just wrote about him recently because, and Frank can tell you about Irina Bokova, the head of UNESCO, communist agent from Bulgaria, actually a member from her youth of the Communist Party of Bulgaria. They murdered hundreds of thousands of people, tortured many more. Her dad was on the Politburo of the Bulgarian Communist Party. He was the editor of their chief propaganda organ. And Baron de Rothschild came out of obscurity to say, hey, that lady should be the next Secretary General of the United Nations. So here we have the mega capitalists of the world promoting a known corrupt communist to run the United Nations, which is supposed to be, according to the head of the United Nations, the Parliament of Humanity. So all these interesting facts, and when you put them all together, you realize something very strange is going on. We tend to think of the world economy as this constellation of independent businesses, and many of them are in competition with each other, and to some extent, a little bit of that is true. But there's a fascinating study out of Switzerland that I'd like to point you to. It was published in the journal PLOS One in 2011. And what they say is that basically the entire world financial system, all the mega corporations, are controlled by a tiny, they call it a super economic entity, a core of entities that all have interlocking boards. So you have a tiny, tiny group of people who own and control the mega banks, which own and control the central banks, which own and control, which also own and control the corporations. So this thing, we see all these separate companies and all that. Well, really, when you get to look behind the scenes, you see that they all link up behind the scenes. It's a very interesting study, and I highly encourage everybody to look at it. Here's some of the ways they tried to graph this that they uncovered. It was the first examination of the control and the ownership of the world financial system, and it revealed some really interesting things. And back to the communism and the capitalists. I don't have too much time to talk about it, but I would like to point you guys to this book because it's incredible. And I'll mention this author again because he's done some amazing work. He's passed away now, but he was a historian at Stanford, and he wrote, this is one of the books that first got me realizing something wasn't right. He wrote Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. And in this book, he goes through the fact that a lot of these mega bankers on Wall Street were involved in financing the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So that doesn't make sense to us, right? We were opposed to communism. Capitalist bankers would certainly be opposed to communism. Well, read the book and you'll see that everything is not as it seems. So, the central banks are a crucial component to this architecture, as Mr. Quigley told us. They are privately owned, right? The Federal Reserve will tell you they're privately owned. If you try to sue the Federal Reserve, they'll respond by saying, hey, we're a private corporation. Freedom of Information Act laws, they don't apply to us. We're a private corporation with private shareholders. We elect our own board, and sorry, but Freedom of Information Act laws don't apply to us. And they're right. They're private corporations, so they're not lying. I wish I had more time to talk about central banks, but just to give you guys some perspective of the power of these organizations, the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program, I don't know if you guys remember the SIGTARP, right, during the Wall Street bailouts, he put together a report. He said that the central bank created 27 trillion new dollars out of thin air to bail out their cronies. For perspective, that's a lot bigger than the size of the U.S. economy in a year, right? The U.S. GDP is about 17 to 18 trillion dollars. So by pushing a few buttons on a computer, these guys printed more money than the entire value of our economy in a year and handed it out to their friends, right? And a lot of times the bankers that got bailed out were sitting on the Federal Reserve's board of directors. So that's really nice how that works, right? If only we could do that with our businesses. They manipulate prices of everything, right? They brag about it. Alan Greenspan has talked about how they manipulate the gold prices. It's very, very dangerous stuff that they're up to. There's the value of the dollar right there. You can see it started in 1913, worth $1. They've stolen about 95 to 97% of the value of our money. So if your great-great-grandpa buried $100 in the backyard, that $100 back then was worth a lot of money. He had to work really hard for that $100. Today, maybe you can buy yourself a nice dinner. So where did all that money go? Well, they took it, right? So they get all this money through these corrupt practices, right? It's not that they're good businessmen, it's that they're corrupt businessmen, right? So they get all this money, and then they stash it all away in their tax-exempt foundations. George Soros just dumped $18 billion into his tax-exempt open society foundations. That's a lot of money. That'll buy you a lot of propaganda, a lot of riots, a lot of insanity. And so they get all this money, they put it in their tax-exempt foundations, and then they use it against us. And we know because Congress investigated, right? In 1952, they put together a committee. Norman Dodd was the chief investigator for the Congressional Committee. And so they were looking into these tax-exempt foundations. The head of the Ford Foundation called him up and said, hey, come to my office, we need to talk. Why are you guys investigating us? I'll tell you what you want to know. And he said, and this is a direct quote from him, Mr. Geither, who was running the Ford Foundation. Mr. Dodd, we are here to operate in response to similar directives, the substance of which is that we shall use our grant-making power, and pay attention, this is incredibly important, to so alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. You can watch the whole video. It's an hour long. It's incredibly good, this interview with Norman Dodd, who was the lead investigator. Their report was incredible, too. It talks about how these foundations financed the destruction of education. They financed a revolution in education, they said, that made possible a revolution in society that never would have been possible had they not been doing these things. Education has been one of my big focuses. I have one copy left of Crimes of the Educators, a book that I wrote with Dr. Blumenfeld. I should have it in the back if anybody wants to take a look. But education has really been the key to all of this, and I won't get into it. That's maybe a topic for another speech. But they've dumbed down and they've indoctrinated our children in school. In fact, for several generations now. So all of us are victims of this too, and the consequences have been devastating. Right? I mean, we are much dumber than we were. So there's Crimes of the Educators. So now I want to talk about the deep state behind the deep state in my remaining time. I think I've got 20 minutes left. And so this is, the really important stuff. We talk about the bureaucracies, we talk about the intelligence community, but the intelligence community and the bureaucracies are actually run by people who are part of these deep state behind the deep state. So they need to be seen as tools of the deep state behind the deep state rather than, as the media is portraying it, the deep state in and of itself. So I have them all as dead people here. It's not a coincidence. But so there's a huge constellation of organizations that make up this deep state, and the key ones we're going to focus on: Council on Foreign, and I could have gone on for a while, but the three really big ones that I want to talk about: Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg, and the Trilateral Commission. These are the key ones. And so before you guys say, oh, well, he's a conspiracy theorist, let's see what David Rockefeller has to say. Somebody might have a copy of this book here. If not, you can get it at your local library. But he brags about being a conspirator. He says that some even, and this is in his book, page 405, you can, again, pick it up at the library, says, some even believe we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States. Conspiring, that's his word, not mine, they're conspiring against the best interests of their own countries to build what they call an integrated global political and economic system, one world, if you will. And then he says, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. So he's proud of being a conspirator working with a cabal against the best interests of his own country to build a one world system. So, anybody can verify this quote. Whip out your smartphone, check it out. You can get the book if you want. So they are so bold now that they brag about this in their own books. He passed away this year, actually, along with another guy. Right? I can't imagine it went well for him, but who knows? That's between him and God. So, they talk about the political parties, right? Well, we're going to vote the rascals out. Well, Carroll Quigley told us in his book, Tragedy and Hope, that this idea that we should have different political parties representing different ideas and policies, that's just silly stuff. That's for the academics and the doctrinaire. Really, we should have two political parties that are almost indistinguishable, except maybe in rhetoric, so that we can vote the rascals out at any election without having any profound shifts in policy. Now, does that sound familiar or what, right? So he says in the same book, Tragedy and Hope, he says, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network. And this is interesting too. He says that they operate in the way that the radical right believes the communists operate. Right? But they're not communists per se, but they have no aversion to cooperating with communists. So, and there's a reason why, right? And he calls them the round table groups. And as part of, the round table groups, this was set up, it's a long story, but it was set up by Cecil Rhodes. I don't know if you guys know Cecil Rhodes, big mining magnate from Southern Africa. There was a country named after him until Jimmy Carter in North Korea collaborated to hand it over to Mugabe. But anyway, so now it's called Zimbabwe. But Cecil Rhodes had huge amounts of money. He put it in a trust, and he created this secret organization called the Round Table Groups. And according to Quigley, the main branch of this in the United States is the Council on Foreign Relations. You can see their little logo right there, right? It looks very strange. It actually means everywhere, the little Latin underneath. And so there's different branches in different countries, right? In England, they have the Royal Institute of International Affairs. In Europe, they have the European Council on Foreign Relations, but it's all the same thing, right? Founded in 1921 after we refused to go peacefully into the League of Nations. They said, well, that's not going to work. We're going to need to do some stuff to get those Americans involved in our globalism. And they succeeded, right? Hillary Clinton, I think I have a video over here.
Oh, thank you very much, Richard. And I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City. But it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
So they tell Hillary Clinton what she should be doing as Secretary of State and how she should be thinking. That's a pretty powerful organization, right? And here we thought Hillary was the problem. So let's see who else we have here. Uh-oh, I think we froze. My next one was going to be a little video with Dick Cheney. Let me see what's going on. Oh, I think we froze. Armando's going to help me get the computer. So the next one I have is a video of Dick Cheney, right? Because this is not a Democrat problem. Dick Cheney has a very similar view, and I have a video of him. Hopefully we can show it. He laughs that, I've been a director of the council for a long time, but I never told the folks back home in Wyoming when I was running for re-election. Yeah, that's so funny, right? We just lie to the dumb voters and keep things going as we want them to go. Let's see. I think my computer must have frozen, so hopefully they can take care of that. But anyways, the members of the CFR include basically anybody you can think of that's really, really powerful, right? The Rockefellers were kind of the leadership cadre within the Council on Foreign Relations. All the mega bankers are members. Rupert Murdoch, the guy who owns Fox News, Wall Street Journal, he's a member. News Corp, which owns Fox News and the Wall Street Journal, is a corporate member of the CFR. Of course, the CNN people are members of the CFR. The Economist, Bloomberg. All the big media are either corporate members, or the journalists are members, or both. All the big oil companies are members. All the big banks are members. Goldman Sachs is, of course, the highest level of corporate member that you can have. Oh, I see. The computer froze. Maybe they can get it started again. But anyways, everybody who's everybody, essentially, is part of the Council on Foreign Relations. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Hundreds, every time a new president gets elected, until Trump, they call up the CFR, they say, all right, well, we need 15 appointees for the State Department. Okay, here they come. They'll all be members of the CFR. Doesn't matter if they're Republican, doesn't matter if they're Democrat. And this has been the case going back generations, right? This is not a new thing. And with Trump, it kind of changed a little bit, right? All the CFR people were screaming. They were all never Trumpers. And he did get a few of them in there. If we can get the presentation back, we'll look at a few of the CFR people who snuck in. One of them is Mitch McConnell's wife, the head of the transportation. Perfect. Yeah, that's it. The head of the transportation bureaucracy. And there's several others, right? H.R. McMaster, the guy who runs the National Security Council. Mike Flynn was not a member, and we saw what they did to him. And then I think they were very pleased. John McCain said how pleased he was to have CFR member H.R. McMaster in there. So a whole bunch of these people. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Too bad this thing is not working. But anyways, everybody who's everybody is a part. And even some people who are not necessarily conspirators, right? Angelina Jolie is one of the members. Pastor Rick Warren out in California, right? The mega pastor, he's a member. So they have somewhere around 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 members. There's term members and then there's life members. Gorsuch was actually a term member, but for whatever reason, he was not made into a life member. I don't know what that means. It might mean nothing. Maybe they just called him up and said, hey, you want to be part of a cool, influential club? And maybe he said, okay, I'll do that. And, who knows? But okay, well, they're going to find me in my spot. And so the CFR, I mean, they admit what they're up to, right? They have a magazine called Foreign Affairs, and if you read this magazine, they're very, very open about their agenda. They talk about dismantling sovereignty, they talk about building up globalism, they talk about building the institutions of global governance, undermining sovereignty, and we've had whistleblowers come out of there too. There was an Admiral Chester Ward, who was the Judge Advocate General for the Navy, spent 16 years in there. And then he came out and blew the whistle. He said, hey, this is an organization that is trying to subvert American sovereignty and build up a totalitarian one-world government. They need to be exposed. He also said, let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, we're getting close now anyway. He also said that there's a small clique within the CFR that calls the shots, and he said this was dominated by the Rockefeller brothers. There's still a few of them left, right? And he also said that there's no term of revulsion that these people hate more than America First, right? That term, there's nothing they hate more than that term. So now we understand why they're frothing at the mouth when they're on TV talking about Trump and his America First, right? So here's some of the members, right? Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, the Bushes, the Clintons, all of them. They're all members. They're all part of the club, and we're not in it, right? And they don't talk about the club. It doesn't matter what fake news network you're watching. They're not going to talk about the CFR. They're not going to talk about Bilderberg or any of these others, right? So the fake journalists are there. The Supreme Court justices are there. They're all part of it, and we're not. So here you can see some of the numbers. 284 in Carter's. He was dominated by the Trilateral Commission, which we'll look at in a minute, all the way to Obama, Bush, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these people. And they dominate every organ of the U.S. government. The intelligence bureaucracies, the regular bureaucracies, education department, doesn't matter. They typically have run it. So I talked about some of the members. You can find the membership roster online. They do us a big favor by putting their membership roster online. Anytime someone's running for office, run their name through there. If they're a member, they're bad news. Okay? Here's some of the corporate members, right? Admiral Chester Ward, who I mentioned. And you can look up what Admiral Ward had to say. He was really an important player in exposing some of this. Okay. And their goal, again, is global government, right? They've told us a million times. Janie in the back, who her husband, Wayne Morrow, awesome guy, state coordinator for the John Birch Society here. I think she has some of this book, The Shadows of Power, and maybe even some reprints of this Council on Foreign Relations if you want to learn more. So the Trilateral Commission is very similar to the CFR, except more elite, right? They have a lot less members. It was inspired by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who also died the same year as Rockefeller. Rockefeller was the founder, Zbigniew Brzezinski was the first director, and Rockefeller got the idea to start this after reading Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, America's Role in the Technotronic Age, right? And in this book, you can read it yourself, he argues that America is obsolete and it's time to build a global government. And he says that the way to do that, of course, will involve merging the communist and non-communist nations. And he loves Marxism, by the way. Read his book. He's got nothing but wonderful, beautiful things to say about Marxism. He acknowledges there were some problems in the Soviet Union, but that's just because communism wasn't implemented right? They're always one execution away from utopia. And so he loved Marxism. Their goal was a new international economic order, and the UN uses that term all the time. And he tells you what the goal is, right? And he wanted trilateral, is talking about North America, Western Europe, and Japan, because he saw these as the key players that needed to be involved in building this because they were the most important economies and most important governments. So here's some other of these non-secret groups. Well, they're officially non-secret, right? They officially exist that are incredibly important in all of this. And here's the Bilderberg. We'll talk about the Bilderberg. I've been to 2 of the Bilderberg meetings. One I managed to sneak in. The other I was just outside as a journalist, and I did get to talk to some of these people. But I didn't make this image, but it's very revealing. Around the inner circle, you have the attendees of the Bilderberg meeting, and then around the outer circle, you have all the entities, corporations, governments that they control. And if you could zoom in, you would see that they run just about everything. So the attendees, it's like a more elite list of CFR people. Bill Gates, Bill Clinton went there as a governor of Arkansas in '91, and they said, okay, you'll be perfect, right? It was like a job interview, I guess. Same thing with Prime Minister Tony Blair, right? He went, and then they put him to be the Prime Minister of the UK. Mario Monti, he went, and then they made him the Prime Minister of Italy. And so we have a million quotes from these guys saying that their agenda is global government. They act like they're doing it for our benefit, right? It's because we're so dumb, we'll just keep killing each other if we don't submit to a global government. Here's a list of some of the attendees: Henry Kissinger, Petraeus, John Edwards, Condoleezza Rice, Jeff Bezos, and on, right? And in the last few years, they've started putting out a list of attendees. It's not always complete, right? One time we saw Bill Gates sneaking in the back, and his name was not on the list they released. But you can check there anyway. And we could go through the quotes, but they're very open about the fact that they're pushing for global government, that they do decide policies at these meetings. I talked to this guy here. I talked to him. He was the head of the Dutch Labour Party, parliamentary leader, and he came out after the Bilderberg in Copenhagen that I was at, and he said, "Okay, well, yeah, of course I'm here in my official capacity, right? Because I can't turn off my official capacity." So they're open about it. Here's Skull and Bones, right? This is the organization that Bush was part of.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look
Are
forward...
you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
How nice. We get a choice between 2 members of the same secret society, right? Isn't that cute? So the Skull and Bones has a long history. A lot of people have speculated that it might be, an American branch of the Illuminati. That's, of course, just speculation. The Illuminati was technically shut down at the end of the 1700s when they figured out about it. Here's some of the people who've been members, right? The Bushes, several presidents, William Buckley, lots of cabinet people, and Anthony Sutton, who I mentioned earlier. He wrote a book. He got a list of the members from Charlotte Iserbyt, who's a friend of mine, and decided to write a book about it. So here's the Bohemian Grove. Now this is really weird stuff. The rabbit hole goes really, really deep. This owl here, this is a 40-foot stone owl that they have at their little retreat. 2,500 of the most powerful men on the planet come here every year, and they gather beneath this giant stone owl, and they do weird rituals, and they wear robes, and they run around naked in the woods and pee on trees. And I'm not kidding you, right? I mean, these are presidents of the United States. These are presidents of the banks, the journalists. Anybody important you can think of who's a man is probably there. So they have about 2,500 members. All the important people are. Well, I would show you guys this video, but we don't have time. It's the cremation of care ceremony. Alex Jones, love him or hate him, he's done some great work. He snuck into their little gathering with a video camera and filmed them in front of this 40-foot stone owl. They said they were burning a human effigy. You can believe that if you like. I have no idea what they were doing. But a lot of people have said this owl is a representation of Moloch, the demon god in the Bible, the Canaanite god who demanded child sacrifices. And so they said that's why they were burning, a child effigy underneath the statue. But, that's weird stuff. And they've been doing it for a long time. This picture's 100 years old, same owl, same weird rituals. There's the owl again during the daytime. Right? Just really weird stuff. There's Reagan, there's Nixon, there's Carter. They all go to this thing, right? And Nixon talking about it. He also had some pretty funny things to say about it. He said, that's the most faggiest thing I've ever seen, a bunch of homosexuals and whatever. But he was an attendee, and in his autobiography, he wrote that his most important speech was the one he gave at Bohemian Grove. And he says the media didn't cover it, of course, because they weren't there or they weren't allowed, but that was the most important speech he ever gave. There you have some more of the people, right? Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Labor, there's the U.S. President, Gerald Ford is sitting there. So these are some of the attendees of Bohemian Grove. Okay, well there he interviews David Gergen, who's been a close advisor to 4 presidents. He says, hey, what were you doing under that 40-foot stone owl, doing the cremation of care? He said, you're not supposed to talk about that. Didn't you take an oath? And he said, no, I didn't take an oath. I snuck in through the woods. I don't respect you for that. I don't want to have this interview. So really weird stuff. So we don't have time to talk about the Illuminati. I will say one more thing about the Bohemian Grove. They absolutely hate Trump, right? And we know because their emails got hacked. Colin Powell wrote an email to the former Minister of Justice in Canada, and everybody apparently at Bohemian Grove thinks he's a disaster. Okay, so that's a good endorsement for me. I'll take Trump. So we don't have time to talk about the Illuminati, but their goal was to overthrow all the governments and the religions of Europe. Supposedly they were suppressed by the Elector of Bavaria when he found out. George Washington was very concerned about him. If you go to the government's archives on the government's website, you can see a letter he sent to his friend saying, yeah, I'm concerned about the Illuminati. He had a book that I think Jenny's got a few copies of in the back, Proofs of a Conspiracy.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The UN's founders, of course, Alger Hiss, right? Our main guy. He was the Secretary General of the founding conference, was later convicted as a communist. Here's some of the deep state swamp creatures in Trump's administration, or at least the people who have ties to these organizations I was talking about. This doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they're in some way affiliated with these organizations. Here's Trump with Kissinger. So what to do, right? And I've only got a minute left, so I'm going to wrap up. But get a copy of the New American Magazine, get a subscription. And I promote it because I love it, not because I write for it. I write for it because I love it. It's the best magazine in America. Jenny can sign you up if you want a copy. You need to be praying a lot, right? We need to work on taking back Congress. With 218 good people in the House of Representatives, we can win this fight. They can shut it all down by defunding it. The John Birch Society is a great organization. It's named by after the Christian missionary John Birch, who was in China. He joined military intelligence during World War II, and then right after the war ended, they killed him. The Chinese communists did. Great patriot, great Christian. Here's founder Robert Welch explaining why we need to expose the conspiracy. And I want to leave you guys with this. This is not just a political battle. Right? There's a spiritual component to this. And if we don't understand it, we're totally going to miss the mark and our efforts are all going to be useless. So the Bible tells us in Ephesians 6:12 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against, principalities, powers, the rulers of darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. So that's the real fight right there, right? And if we don't understand that, we're going to miss the mark. So we need to be reading our Bibles, we need to be praying, and we need to be asking God for wisdom and guidance. And I'll leave you guys with this one quote from the Bible, because I just love it so much. So the Bible acknowledges these people. So the kings of the earth, right, they're conspiring against the Lord and His anointed. And let's see how God reacts. So He ridicules them. He laughs at them. So if God can laugh at them, we can laugh at them too, and we should. And then check out Janny's table in the back. We'll have some books and some more information. Thank you, guys.